Hi, I'm Caitlin Sweeney. I'm the Director of Digital Publications at the Wildenstein Plattner Institute. First, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Huffa Frobes-Cross. He is the project manager of the Tom Wesselmann Digital Corpus, which is what we'll be talking about today. The Tom Wesselmann Digital Corpus is a dynamic index of the artworks recorded in the archives of the Tom Wesselmann estate. The digital corpus, which launched in June 2020, can be found on the WPI's website, wpi.art. You look at the top left, there's a banner, click Wesselmann, and that will take you directly to the digital corpus. As you can see, there are a combination of black and white and color images of Tom Wesselmann's work. If an artwork has not been reviewed by the WPI's Wesselmann Committee, then we only display the black and white image, the title, and the date. However, if a work has been reviewed by the committee, then suddenly we change the image to color and we include the cataloging that we have currently. This includes medium, dimension, inscription. It also includes provenance, exhibition, and publications. Huffa, perhaps you could start us off by talking about the submission process and how a work could be included in the digital corpus.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, I'll take you through the submission process, which we also, I should note, have recently revised, and we'll talk a bit later in the conversation about the reasoning behind that. So the first step, if you want to submit a work to the WPI Wesselmann project specifically, is to email wesselmann@wpi.art and get in contact with the Wesselmann team. Ideally, if you could send us as much information as you have in that email, it's very helpful to us. That would include your preferred credit line, any provenance, exhibition, or loan history, or bibliographic references you may have, a high-res image, and any photographs of the signature, verso, or labels. Any of that would be very helpful. You can, of course, submit a work even if you don't have those things, but those expedite the process. So that's the first step, emailing wesselmann@wpi.art and letting us know about your work. After that, we'll be in contact with you about your work. And there's basically two ways that this process can develop. For many of the works, they are currently listed in the digital corpus in black and white, which is to say they are either oil studies or what Tom Wesselmann categorized as unique major works that are listed in his records. And for those works, all you need to do is complete and sign a WPI submission agreement, which the Wesselmann team will send to you, and then we will get started on your work. If the work is not currently listed in those records and it does not appear on the corpus in black and white, you need to submit the WPI submission agreement as above, but then you also need to submit a $2,000 inclusion request fee that will cover the research necessary to work on a work that is not included in the artist's records as of yet. And in either case, we'll immediately begin work on it, and you can expect that, that our research will conclude in time for the next quarterly update. We update the corpus every quarter, and we make every effort to respond to every request in that time period. So that's the basic process. Yeah.
And so the next topic that I wanted to touch on with this audience in particular was the rationale behind why we decided to do a digital corpus instead of a Catalogue Raisonné. So this will be a very nuts and bolts conversation, I think. But I think the easiest way to give insight into what we were thinking at the time is to talk about the players who we were operating with. So the first player that the WPI was engaged with is, of course, the estate of Tom Wesselmann. They were eager to preserve the artist's legacy, promote his work, and also have someone acting as an authority in the field on his work. And the corpus allows that to happen without the estate having to directly take on the work of the Catalogue Raisonné and everything that would entail. So part one, we were working with the estate. The second part that I wanted to talk about is the market. And really their demand is that they're looking for a reassurance that the work that they are trying to sell, I don't want to say it's authentic, but that it has some sort of archival provenance, that it can be reliably sold at auction or the gallery. And I think on the one hand, there's an attitude that we as Catalogue Raisonné scholars, we don't owe the market anything. And scholarship should be objective, independent. We should be making conclusions about the artists of independent of what's going on in the market. And I think that's absolutely true. However, on the other hand, it's a real opportunity to work with people who are in the market. We can't minimize the role that they play, both in terms of the promotion of the artist's legacy and the research process itself. Someone from an auction house comes to us, they may be giving us the only opportunity to see a work in person, or it might be a new work that we've never known about before, or they might be providing a connection to a collector that's really invaluable. So much of Catalogue Raisonné research is putting off the final conclusion. And we wanted to be able to respond in real time. And I'm explaining all this because I wanted to explain why we were taking this responsive approach seriously. The third sort of player is the WPI itself, the context that we were operating in. We inherited a number of legacy Catalogue Raisonné projects from the Wildenstein Institute in Paris, including Monet and Renoir and Gauguin. These legacy projects require that the artworks go through a submission process, wherein we examine the work and we issue attestation letters, or physical pieces of paper that guarantee that the work will be included in a future Catalogue Raisonné. This is how the previous Wildenstein Institute operated for decades. And there's actually an expectation in the art market that works of art by these artists have to be submitted to the WPI. And in exchange, we will issue these physical attestation letters. However, the WPI is really trying to emphasize its digital presence. And when considering how to approach our first new project, we didn't really want to perpetuate the demand for physical attestation letters. On the other hand, a full Catalogue Raisonné was not going to be completed anytime in the near future. So we wanted to figure out a way to share our findings as the artworks were submitted, but we also didn't want to just produce a list of works that we'd seen. That doesn't really help anyone except for the owner of the paintings. We wanted this to be an interesting resource and useful to a wider audience. So this led us to develop a platform where the entire of could be seen, but also where the WPI could make it clear which works had been submitted and reviewed by the committee, and in the process, eliminate the need for these physical attestation letters. And also hopefully drive readers to consult the digital corpus for the most up-to-date information. Lastly, I want to touch on this last player we were working with, and that's the tech. I think this is another interesting conversation for this group because we've been working with a German tech team that was funded by the Huffa Plattner Foundation. And very reasonably, it was important to our founders that we provide proof of concept. So unlike a book, when building an online platform, there was an eagerness to see what we'd been working on as soon as possible. So we wanted to get something out there before, say, 2030. The last point I just want to put it out there as well is not a player, but the Wesselmann estate has such extensive and interesting archives, and it was a unique opportunity. So we could justify sharing our individual finds as they come along by putting them within the context of the whole of and showing, archival information about the works for students, for scholars. It would enable this dynamic, updatable platform so that information could feel like it was really current. We'd also be able to improve the platform as the technology developed. And most importantly, we could be transparent about the process of how we are including works in a Catalogue Raisonné. these are all really lofty goals. And so the digital corpus, it launched in 2020. And Huffa, why don't you tell me what happened during the first year? Can you share some of the good things, but also some of the challenges, perhaps?
Of course, yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, no, it was a lot happened in the first year, and I think we learned an enormous amount. So yeah, I'll talk both about some of the things that became clearly advantages about our approach and things that I think worked really well and things that we had to address. I mean, that became more difficult because of the way that we approached it, even though I think that it is worth it to do the kind of project that we did. So, I mean, a lot of these things echo the reasoning that you've described really well, and sort of show ways in which those things have been borne out. So I would say the first thing that I think was very successful is it allowed us at launch to share an enormous amount of information. So we weren't sort of announcing a project and then saying, well, wait and see for something that's actually interesting and worth seeing. At the day of launch, we were sharing all of the works listed in the corpus in black and white, at least. So, you know, everything listed in the artist records were there in black and white. So immediately you had a really valuable research tool. People could go there and see, you know, all of these works that Wesselmann made. And for example, you could do things like see very clearly certain developments in his work, you know, over the course of, you know, each year. You could sort those works by medium and by series and do, you know, analysis on those bases. So it allowed for a lot of insight into his body of work immediately. Of course, this was facilitated hugely by something that you brought up, Caitlin, which is that the estate had such extensive archives that we could actually do this, right? I don't think this is necessarily transferable to every project on every artist, because we were working from, you know, this very solid ground of deep research on his work and his careful recording and organization of his work that we could sort of base the corpus on. So it was really facilitated by that. And then, of course, the other thing we were able to share immediately were a pretty significant set of works that we had already examined. So we, even at launch, we were able to show, you know, quite a few works that were already in color and that already had full cataloging that people could look at and also see the kind of thing that would be coming in the future and see more information about those works. I would say another aspect that was very successful was our ability to be responsive to new research. As new research came in, as new people contacted us, as new works came up for auction, we were able to engage with that, take submissions, look at works that were coming up, look at works that were coming up for exhibitions, look at works that were in public collections, and continue to add and bolster, you know, our research, so that over the course of this year, you've already seen development in the corpus, significant development. Things have expanded, and also small things I should note as well that might not be as immediately obvious. We don't just turn works from black and white to color. We also, you know, on works that are already in color, we may have ongoing research on publications and bibliography and exhibition, bibliography, publication, same thing, but exhibitions, publications, and we complete that research and then start publishing those things as well. So you'll see on works that are already in color, as time goes on, a more complete exhibition history, for example, as we complete research. So those things expand as well. So there's a real responsiveness to the research that we're doing. It also allowed, I think, a really high level, an unusual level of transparency about what we were actually doing. When we examine a work and turn it to color, it's date stamped with the date of examination. So you know, okay, this is when this work was looked at. This is what this means. The decision to include this work was made on the basis of an examination on this date, or we also have some works that are in public collections that we have made a decision to include and we haven't examined it. Again, that's very transparent. It's right there. It's listed with the work. So, you know, you can really follow along with what we're doing in our process and our reasoning. And you can also, you know, see aspects of the reasoning that we've used to include these works in the research that we publish. I hope that in the future, we're going to be able to even expand that more. So, you know, there is other functionality on some other projects that WPI has worked on, including the Gauguin project that's up now, that allow for actually linking to documents that are sources for decisions. And so in the future, I hope the Wesselmann corpus will also be able to do that. So even more transparency, you know, okay, so this provenance event or this exhibition, why do we know this fact? We might be able to actually tell you exactly the source that we're working from. So that, I think, kind of transparency was great. The other thing is, and that directly relates to that, is that we didn't necessarily have to feel the need to hold back a lot of the sources that we were using. So we, along with all of the other information that we have inherited from the estate, which is fantastic, we've also been able to scan and process their archive. And because of the nature of our approach, we've been able to start to make that available. So that started just a few months ago, and we're going to continue to publish portions of that archive going forward over the coming year. And so we have this whole other set of research along with the corpus that we're being able to make available, and as a tool that is also very valuable to scholars and collectors and dealers, you know, that you can look, for example, right now at installation images for a lot of exhibitions that Wesselmann was involved in. You can look at great portraits and studio shots, all of which are really interesting and also provide very interesting insights into his work. And Wright, actually, I expect, as you're listening to this talk, and I apologize for that background noise, but Wright, I think as you're listening to this talk, we will be about to publish his correspondence, which you will also be able to see as well. So those are all great successes that we've had. Some of the things, so I would say actually all of the challenges that we've really faced are directly correlated to positive elements of the corpus, aspects of, so I mean, you know, it's putting a positive spin on it for sure, but I think this is true. It's because
this is why I love working with you, Huffa.
Glass half full, you know, right?
Yeah, it is. No,
right.
Sorry to interrupt.
But yeah, I mean, because of our transparency, because of our responsiveness, because of all the things that we've shared, that produces a lot of challenges, right? So I think one of the big challenges was how the availability of information on the corpus affects the motivation for people to submit. So at launch, as I said, in black and white, every unique major work and oil study that is listed in the artist's records is there for everyone to see. It was hard to message, and this is actually something that I want to emphasize, this message right here, that there is a very distinct division between a work that is in black and white listed on the corpus and a work that is shown in color. I think it was easy for a lot of people to look at the corpus and see, oh, I can find my work in black and white. That's good enough. I'm not going to submit it. But in fact, if a work is in black and white, it doesn't actually mean that any individual object owned by any individual person correlates with that black and white work, or that anyone has done any work to establish that connection. All that it means is that we understand that there is a work which matches these elements in the artist's records that exists. We haven't seen it, we haven't done research on it. And so that was something that we really needed to continue to emphasize. Yes, you can see that there is a work displayed in black and white with the title of a work that, you know, may be in a collection or may be coming up for sale on the corpus, but that doesn't mean that it's examined. It doesn't mean that it's included. It doesn't mean that we've done any vetting of the work yet. So that distinction, I think, was really, you know, important and continues to be something that we have to message, right? But this again, I mean, my point being that in a way, like putting all that work out there made our project a much more valuable scholarly resource, but also made it more complicated in terms of the way it functioned within the market. So that, I think, is one challenge that we faced. I think the other was the complexity of the submission process. So as the submission process was initially set up, there were several steps that you had to go through, and I think the complication of those steps deterred some people initially from submitting. So that's what we've directly tried to respond to in streamlining the process, as I discussed at the beginning of our presentation. So now, initially, all you have to do if you want to get in touch with us and you want to submit a work is you send an email to wesselmann@wpi.art, as I previously mentioned. And then if your work is listed in the corpus, we get back in touch with you. And the only thing you need to do is sign a submission agreement, and we will get right back in touch with you and start research on your work. If your work is not listed in the corpus, you also have to pay a $2,000 submission inclusion request fee. And that is the only other aspect of the process. So it's a very simple process. It doesn't require you to do much but send an email in order to initiate it. And we really hope that that will kind of allow people more easily to want to get in touch with us and, you know, motivate submissions going forward. So there you go. So yeah, those are, I think those are really the two complications and challenges I think that the corpus primarily raised, which was, yeah, around that tension between the availability of information and also the complication of the submission process.
Yeah, thank you. We look forward to answering any questions that you may have in the Q&A session.
That was great. I know it's like my second time watching the video, but it takes me straight back to when I was working on the David Smith Catalogue Raisonné and like the early steps. Anyway, I hope everyone else enjoyed it too. Let me introduce myself. I'm Tracee, a proud member of the CRSA Programs Committee. Some of you may know me from my work on the David Smith Catalogue Raisonné. And I'm super pleased to meet you. You don't know me yet. And I'm even more pleased to be here with both Huffa and Caitlin from WPI. Everybody, hi.
Hello.
Yes, yes. I do have some questions for you, but maybe we'd want to start off a little bit with some talking about Tom Wesselmann. If you guys would just want to share a blurb, a little overview for people that are not so familiar with the artist.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, Tom Wesselmann, I think, is most known as a pop artist, and he certainly came up in that generation. He was in a lot of the kind of signature shows of the early kind of pop art era, most importantly, probably the New Realist show at Janus Gallery in '62. And he definitely has elements to his work that are typical of that era, in the sense that his work, especially his '60s work, involves a lot of appropriation of mass media materials, billboards, mass-produced items in assemblage works, and things like that. He also appropriated some methods of manufacture from, commercial sources like vacuum formed plastic that was used to make signs, to make works of his. But interestingly, he really always resisted his classification as a pop artist, right? He was never really comfortable with that. And I think that's a core element to understand his interests, because in a way, even though all of those things are true of him, he was also someone who's very concerned with long-running traditions in the history of painting and in the history of art, particularly the nude. Probably his most well-known works are the Great American Nudes, which is his engagement with that history. and very much to the point, actually, in a lot of his own writing about himself, the history of 20th century modernist abstraction. He basically said that when he started out, he, saw himself as in the tradition of abstract expressionism, but saw no kind of further place to go. And so instead of, becoming an abstract expressionist, turned towards these modes of practice as a way of kind of furthering a formalist engagement with painting and to some degree other kinds of three-dimensional works via other means. And so I think that's a really important aspect of his work as well. He also, of course, had a really long career. So I think the other thing to note is that he has this initial period in the 60s where he explores all of these different elements to his work. And then he also has a whole lot of series going on for the next 40 years where he develops an interest in, for example, the Mouths and Smokers series, which are isolated mouths and then smoking mouths that go on and become larger and grander as time goes on. He develops an interest later in the 80s and 90s in this very interesting technique of scanning drawings and using them to laser etch metal works that are then painted, which becomes a whole another epic in his work. And as I'll also get back to probably in relation to another issue we might get to, he very late in his career returned to abstraction and actually started doing abstract work as well. So I think that gives you a little bit of a sense of who he is. Yeah.
No, very like multidisciplinary.
Mm-hmm.
Was I right in remembering that I read somewhere that he actually invented a tool for like laser cutting?
Well, yes. I mean, he was involved
Kind
in
of.
inventing it. He was involved in inventing it. I would say to kind of give credit where credit's due. He was an artist, right? And so he worked with technicians and engineers to develop this technique, but he didn't do it on his own. But yes, he was very much involved in inventing it. Yeah.
Okay, just a little aside there. So, maybe both of you can share a little bit of your own like personal involvement with how you know like the artist and his work. I had actually asked Caitlin and Huffa to maybe prepare an image of their favorite works of Wesselmann's. Caitlin, do you want to start?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. I chose an early collage, somewhat intentionally because of its personal connection. I was involved mostly in this project at the very beginning when we were trying to establish the guidelines for examination. So we were looking at works in the estate's collection. And many of these works were this small, very early collage works. And this is one example. It's called Porch. And I selected it really because for me, I'd always thought of Tom Wesselmann as a capital P pop artist. I knew the Great American Nudes, and my engagement with these works led me to appreciate how whimsical he can be with materials. He's so invested in creating space, in exploring different textures. Huffa and I were on this hunt to understand how each material played a different role in different compositions. So there was that element. I think even noticing here the wood of the table and the chairs is actually the wood of the board that the piece is on. And he's creating this idea of a screened in porch. And so he's actually got a screen and he's painted the screen here. Again, in this sort of endearing sense that you get from these works. And I should add that they are very tiny, are these beautiful cut out little vegetables. So he's so many things that he blows up into much bigger scale are evident here. But I'm also intrigued by the sincerity of them, the relationship between object and like what it's meant to represent. All to say, he's engaging with ideas of collage practice and modernist painting that I found very interesting. And to tie it back to Catalogue Raisonné work, it was the examination and investigation of the materials and how to describe them that really just opened up my view of his practice. So.
No, that's great. I really love how works that are not major works from an artist serve to like enlighten us about some of the other ones that we look at and we think that we know because we see them all the time, and like we have this idea of them as icons.
Yes.
But like there are always like secrets to be had there.
Huffa, you had such a great story. When I was telling Huffa I was going to show this work, Huffa's been conducting these oral history interviews with his studio staff. Maybe you want to jump in because it's your story.
Yeah, and then of course share your favorite as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, the story is really that, and this is also a plug for our oral history series. So we've been doing these oral histories with people related to the Wesselmann's career, his family, his estate. And one of the people that we just recently interviewed was Monica Serra, who was the studio manager during his lifetime and later was studio manager during his lifetime and also was a very important model for a lot of his work in the 80s and 90s. And she has a great story about very soon after meeting Wesselmann, he had actually throughout the previous years spent a lot of time and effort reacquiring works from this era of porch because they were so important to him. And he was basically like, okay, at the time he was showing these huge mouths, these very grand works. And he was like, if you really want to understand my work, you have to see these pieces. And took her back to the studio and like, with great, focus and importance showed her these early works of his that he saw as really kind of defining his artistic project from an early era. So yeah, he himself saw them as extraordinarily important to his legacy. Yeah.
That's great to know. And so which one is your favorite?
Well,
is it from his era as well?
I do want to know. It's totally different era. I actually I intentionally chose something at the very end of his career that's completely different.
Cool.
And I chose it because I'm so involved in Wesselmann's work. It's very hard to choose a favorite, but I really wanted to choose something that showed just how surprising his work and his career can be, and some of the concerns that extended from his very earliest days to his last work. So this work was made in 2004. It's actually called Exhibition Detail, and this is a slightly zoomed in image of it, but if you're back a little bit farther, you can actually see that the work, it might be confusing when you're looking at it this way. The work is everything that you're looking at. It includes the wall, it includes both artworks, it includes the floor, and it's actually. So
is this like an installation, Huffa? Sorry to interrupt.
It is. It's
okay.
Like an installation sculptural work. Yeah. And I think it's sort of, you might say that it's probably more of a sculpture than an installation because it's not meant to be walked into. You kind of look at it as an object from a distance. But he took two works that he had made in the 2000s and recreated them, actually using the same processes that he used to originally create the initial works, created this kind of faux wall and floor and installed them to kind of create a hyper-focused mini exhibition, in a sense, as a sculpture to make a point about the work that he was making at the time. On the left on your screen, it's 5 Spot, which is a 2004 abstract work, and on the right it's Sunset Nude with Matisse, which is a 2002 work. And he very explicitly was trying to kind of show how his interest in abstraction never waned, and this return to abstraction was just a return to concerns that he'd had all along. And so he was really juxtaposing these in part to make that point. that you can see his same concerns with composition, et cetera, in both of these works, echoing one another. The other reason that, or the other couple reasons that I wanted to show it is one, that so much of his work is concerned with returning to things that he was interested in early on, over and over again, self-referencing and building on things that he established. So in some ways you can look at this sunset nude with Matisse, and if you've looked at his Great American Nudes, there are many aspects of this that are kind of returning to and reiterating and playing on his very, very earliest works. Which of course this entire piece is about. And then the other thing that is interesting about it is just that I don't think that a lot of people think of Wesselmann as a, creator of large scale sculpture, let alone large scale sculpture that could almost be mistaken for an installation. And so it shows how he was interested in an enormous range of mediums and practices while continuing to have very focused sort of aesthetic interests. So I think those are the main reasons why I really wanted to show that work. Yeah.
No, it's great. I'm really interested to know that the one on the right is called Sunset with Matisse, because as I was looking through the corpus, I definitely felt that a lot of those reclining nudes reminded me of Matisse paintings, particularly one that I really like. I think it's like the Baltimore Museum that's called like Large Reclining Nude. It's like this big, large, drooping, like orange nude. And Wesselmann seems to have like a lot of those like very similar shapes, like just reclining there in his paintings. So no,
absolutely.
Just like fun fact.
Absolutely. No, he was obsessed with Matisse, and Matisse recurs again and again. In fact, actually, I'll just tell one other interesting story because it's really fascinating and kind of.
No, I love it.
This work. His abstract works actually start because he's cutting up these pieces of mylar that he used to kind of make compositions, and the leftover pieces are the things that he would use to kind of collage and make these abstract compositions.
Cutouts.
Yeah. And another plug for the oral history, Monica actually in the oral history also describes that the moment that he kind of came up with this idea, Monica noticed these pieces of mylar sitting on the cover of a Matisse book and was like, this looks amazing. And she came over and looked at, he came over rather, Tom came over and looked at it and said, oh yeah, this is, and went on to kind of adopt that process to create his abstract work going forward. So that Matisse connection sort of underlies this even more strongly.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Huffa, do you have any of those oral histories like uploaded on the website, the WPI website right now? Great.
All of them, yeah.
They are all, okay.
All the ones we finished are up, yeah.
That sounds good. So if anyone was interested, especially after all those great stories that Huffa has just told us, they are right there available on the WPI website. I'm going to go take a look, certainly. I also wanted to say, and I see that a lot of you have noticed already, you can definitely submit questions. There's a little link at the bottom of the screen, or not link, there's a little caret at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A. So if you'd like to type one in, I will try to address as many of them as possible and to give them to our panelists here, who hopefully have some more really interesting stories for us. So I'm looking now right here, and a few of the questions from more than one person. They've asked, what is the WPI definition of Catalogue Raisonné, and how does that differ from the digital corpus that you're doing right now? Like, what is like the distinction, if any?
Huffa, should I take this one to start? Sure. So, we're talking here about the rationale behind creating the digital corpus, but we do allude to the fact that we want to create a Catalogue Raisonné for Tom Wesselmann. So that question is something that we are actually continually coming back to all the time. We recently published the Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné for the Tahitian period. Yep. And I think, the easiest distinction at this point is to say, we had not examined, but like researched all of the works within that time period, published them at once. We provided a full exhibition history, bibliography, the sort of level of completeness, let's say, was very high. Provenance was researched to the very, very, very best of our capabilities, which is, to give credit to our French team, quite incredible. And it relied heavily on the archives that we have in France that we had inherited from the Wildenstein Institute. And some of the capabilities that Huffa alluded to is currently visible on the Gauguin platform. So that means, having links to a lot of our scanned publications. These are publications that were published before, I think, 1924. So unfortunately, not really relevant to our Wesselmann project. But the next phase of that technological rollout, we hope, is a more dynamic interface between our digitized archives. And so that will have a really big impact on Wesselmann. So in one sense, we talk about what will a Wesselmann Catalogue Raisonné look like, and we're hoping to focus on specific series and do a complete analysis. And it also brings up one of the core elements of the digital corpus, which is that, we mentioned the attestation letters.
Right.
This platform is kind of meant to elude that, it's meant to portray like what we've seen, what we've examined in person. But as I'm sure many of you know, it's impossible to examine all works in the Catalogue Raisonné. There are going to be works in private collections in Japan and Korea, and we're going to want to have a publication someday that includes everything in color, that includes full research for everything. And I don't think that means that the digital corpus will go away, because there will still need to be a vehicle where we can say, we've seen this work, we haven't seen this work. It might merge together in the future. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like quite yet. But
so you haven't decided on a print format yet or an online one?
Excuse me. A Catalogue Raisonné would be digital as well. Yeah, I don't think
it would be digital as well. Oh, yes. That would be really interesting though, to have like the digital corpus and the Catalogue Raisonné, and like having to upkeep two programs and like what information you have in one and like what you would have in the other one. That seems like a challenge to me.
Yes. Yes, certainly. And I think I hope you can tell that we are good-natured about the fact that we are kind of developing this in real time. The digital corpus was developed because we had a project that we wanted to work with, and we wanted to see how we could, like I said, get all of the information we have out there. When a Catalogue Raisonné is complete and it's published, it's authoritative, but it's done. And the digital realm, it's so tempting to want to share as much information as possible. And so we're trying to do that as responsibly as we can, but we don't have all the answers yet.
No, but like, that's what I think is so great about the digital corpus. Because again, like I said, it really does take me back to the early stages of the Catalogue Raisonné that I was working on. It would have been great to have a resource like this, just for peace of mind. Because, we crowdsource our information. That's why we have the CRSA, and, we're looking at other people, other Catalogues Raisonné for examples of like what we should do or what we should not do. So just having something like this in real time, like you say, it's just like immensely helpful and comforting.
That's really nice of you to say. It was, I think for us, we realized that we were doing something pretty experimental. And I think we have to give credit also to the Tom Wesselmann estate for trusting us to do that. They have just been incredible partners in this, and really supporting our research, and excited to see it happening, because I think they just love Tom's work so much that like for them, that generous spirit is really, I might be getting a little bit schmaltzy, but like I think it's true. They are excited to see it.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think that's sort of like the ideal partnership, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is the estate of Tom Wesselmann involved sort of in the day-to-day decision-making process for the digital corpus or the Catalogue Raisonné? Like, are you in touch with them constantly, either Caitlin or Huffa? And going along with that, anyway, we have a lot of questions about the committee for this attestation process that you're doing. So would they be like on the committee? I'm sorry, this is like a lot of questions. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'll just say that our committees are anonymous, and part of the reason is to enable scholars to do their work without fear of retribution. It is supposed to be something that enables people to work in peace and also like preserve the objectivity of this process. So like we are talking to multiple sources, but like we do maintain their anonymity. That said, research is a different topic. Like there has to be something informing our decisions. So I mean, Huffa, you can describe your research process with the estate, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of research, we're absolutely in touch all the time. I mean, I think that one of the things that's come up a lot in our discussion and in our video is that Wesselmann and then the studio and then the estate kept such good records that's an integral part of our work. So that process of working with them to understand what these records are. I mean, no record, no archive is ever entirely transparent, right? It's never, you can't just approach an archive and just understand it. So a huge part of the initial process that Caitlin and I were both involved in was just like talking with them constantly to figure out what does this mean? How does this make sense? What is this, there was this kind of mind-blowing moment, I think, early on where we were looking at the registration numbers that Tom Wesselmann uses to organize works. And we had so much access to these registration numbers and they were so important to what we were doing. We just on a fundamental level had to figure out what they actually meant. And if you read the user's guide now, you'll see that it's very carefully phrased as to what exactly these registration numbers are, because initially, an initial totally understandable reaction would be to say, oh, these were related to how Tom Wesselmann understood his works as artistic series. But in fact, they were really an organizational device that maybe echoed, but were not definitional of his artistic series. And we would never have been able to figure that out without literally, hours and hours of conversation with people at the estate.
Sure.
So those are the kinds of things where sort of that relationship is totally integral. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's really great to have a resource like that, that has, I guess, that sort of like institutional history, I guess. Going back to the Authentication Committee that you have, I understand that it's anonymous. I guess what we're asking is, like, what types of people are you looking for in that committee? Like, are you looking for scholars? Are you looking for people that are more just like, what's the word? Just like people that knew Wesselmann? Like, who is it that you're, who is it that you're looking to place on this committee, and like what type of expertise so did you find helpful?
And I do want to just say that it's not an authentication committee. I think we want to be really clear about the fact that we are
please correct
creating a scholarly publication, and these are our opinions. And so it does come back to what you're saying, who gets to issue these opinions, because opinions certainly then take on lives of their own. But I think, over the course of the past few years, the WPI has been assembling a number of committees, and not any of them look the same. Sometimes it's studio staff or families, sometimes it's dealers, sometimes it's academics. It really depends on the artist.
Okay.
That's the best. Is that, Huffa, do you have anything to add?
Oh, that's helpful.
I think as in terms of how we approach that question, I think you've gotten exactly to it. We're not necessarily looking for specific people. We're looking for who are the best people to answer these kinds of questions, to Yeah, again, yeah, as Caitlin said, not authenticate, but to make a determination of inclusion in a catalog raisonné. Who can answer that question the best?
Yeah. And I should say, like, the three tiers of thinking, we also have the archives. And so we could not do a project like this without such extensive archives. And, we publish the image and a title and a date, but we also have, medium and dimensions and photographs and things that go quite a long way in doing the work for us. So in some ways, it's just making sure that the object we have in front of us does match that archival record.
For the most part, there
are for the most part.
Right. No, sometimes like you hit a roadblock and like the best you can do is the best you can do, right? Mm-hmm. And like that boundary is different every time. Going back to the submission process, actually, can you discuss a little bit more about, I know you said that it's way more informal now because you're getting sort of a roadblock, or it was forming a roadblock, I guess, to people submitting because they thought it was a little bit too complicated. What is that like now? And do you still provide these attestation letters that WPI is known for, or are you really trying to move away from that and, use the digital corpus for that?
Yeah, I think those are really good questions. I mean, I think the easiest way to describe this submission process now, the way we've tried to make it as simple as possible, is truly, in essence, send me an email, right? And then like I will walk you through the process. It's
yes.
But the slightly more in-depth version of it, but again, trying to keep it very simple, is if we can find something that matches what you've sent to us, the information that you've sent to us that seems to match something in the artist's records, we don't charge a fee. If we can't, that means we have to do significantly more work. So we do. That's the basic division. In terms of attestation letters in general, no, but if there are times, there are works, for example, that we're not necessarily at a place yet to publish on the corpus. If someone really wants some acknowledgement of something that is, for example, a work on paper, which we don't have in the corpus yet, just because we haven't published those yet.
Right.
That as a temporary thing, that is a thing that we can do. But in essence, we do, in general, want to move away entirely from it. And I expect in the near future, once we have drawings and prints up on the corpus, we will move away entirely from letters of attestation. It won't be necessary anymore because we'll be able to just purely use publication for that purpose.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense, like save paper, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's totally transparent, right? That's, I think, the really big thing. Everyone sees it. You don't have to like, it's just right there. Yeah.
No, it's out there for everyone to see in color, right? I did notice also that there is a submission fee. I think everyone did. You showed that off, but only for works that aren't in the Wesselmann archive or that you didn't really have a record of. How did you come up with a number for that submission fee? Because I know that was something that, we sort of thought about and then discarded because we were afraid that it would be a prohibitive cost and it would stop people from wanting to submit. What do you both think about that?
Sure. I can take this off. We came up with a $2,000 fee because that is what we charge for our French projects. So that was already the standard.
It was established already.
Submission. It was established. And in terms of frustrating new works from coming to light, part of the reason that the standard exists for the French projects is because we think of it as people are submitting works when they need something. Oftentimes, you are selling a work at auction and you want the research now. And so we're diverting our focus away from our Catalogue Raisonné research to essentially do a service. And, if someone has a work of art, let's say that's not in the corpus, but that we want to research, we wouldn't proactively reach out to somebody and be like, give us $2,000. It's just that, we would definitely do that work for free. Absolutely. The $2,000 fee comes in if they were trying to sell it at auction, and like they need that cataloging now. They want that evidence that it matches the work in the archive, or like, even more importantly, that it's not in the archive, but it's still been seen by the committee. They need that to happen immediately. That's why we add the fee.
Okay, I think that.
But if you have a work and you submit it to us and we're like, oh, we're not focusing on mouths right now, but when we do, we'll call you.
Right.
That's the rationale.
That, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And again, I think that all goes toward transparency, I think, right? Just to like have it, do the research and like have that out there.
Yeah. Eventually it'll make it, hopefully.
I have no doubt, especially, having worked on a project that took only almost 20 years, I think, to come to fruition. So yeah, these things just like take a long time, and you have to like do what you can to like get to the finish line. So I know that this project is still, in progress. That's what the digital corpus is to me. Like, you see this work happening, pretty much as it happens, right? But even so, even as you're like still like walking through these like middle steps, have you like thought already like pros, cons? Actually, I would have gone back to like step 10 and done this differently. Like, is there anything that you wish that you could have like gone back and changed at this point?
Do you mean in terms of like how we put together the corpus, or how?
I think, yeah, how you put together the corpus.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we addressed in the video that absolutely was the case is that we realized that the submission process was too complicated and too hard to understand, and also that we had to message, as I said, more clearly what inclusion and a black and white image, how those things were different, and why it was important to get in touch with us. I think it was difficult at first to establish relationships with the people that had the works, because it was difficult for us to demonstrate why this was, we were an important project to engage with. And I think we've really improved that. I mean, I can say just demonstrably, we've really improved that over this past season and seen the effects of it, and it's been great. So yeah, I think that's something that I first would have done differently, and then we're fortunately able to be flexible enough to go back and fix and actually do differently.
Yeah. And I think the fact that we're not the family foundation for the artist, or it's I think a lot of the initial reaction to us were like, who are you? Don't you do Monet? Why are you here? And in a way, the digital corpus really helps in that sense, because Huffa's been able to publish, and show that we're busy and show that we're committed. And, so I think for any Catalogue Raisonné project, it's building that sense of trust within the professional community, and also getting the word out that, it's important for the legacy of the artist. It's important for so many reasons to come to us, but lots of people don't know that necessarily.
I like that you brought up this idea of trust, because I know that like people that like don't work on one specifically don't always see this, but there is a lot of anxiety that goes into building up a legacy. Like, it's somebody's family, like, and because of that, like, you get really worried about it. And like, I feel like people think like you have one shot at this, and it has to be like the absolute like end of Catalogue Raisonnés, and it's tough, I think. And like that anxiety like spawns on to like the people that are working on it, and like everybody just wants to do the best that they can, but it is, and you have to like trust each other.
I always go back to this one experience I had where I was talking to someone, and I described a Catalogue Raisonné as a tool, and they looked at me quizzically and they said, "Oh, funny, I've I've never thought of it as a tool. And I was like, oh, well, what do you think of it as? And they said a monument. And I think that that's a really important distinction that we have right now, is that when I was doing work on the Joss for Johns project, I was basically emailing like this, I mean, I call it a coven, but like this group of Catalogue Raisonné scholars who we all have the answers, we all have opinions about what's going on. And
Yeah.
We are creating a tool, and hopefully by sharing what we have on Wesselmann, we're contributing our little piece of the puzzle for the art world in the 60s and you know, post-war art in general, but
Yes. Mm-hmm.
this particular period.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you use the word tool. I can see in the chat right now and in the Q&As that a lot of people are asking about the tool, the digital corpus in particular. Can you talk specifically a little bit, and maybe this might be, I see that we might be running a little bit over. So sorry everyone, and thank you for staying. But can you talk a little bit about the tool that you're using? Like, was it a custom design that you had for the corpus? And you know, what sort of decisions went into like building it the way that you wanted it to be?
Yes, it is a custom
Yes.
design tool.
Okay.
And but it has this German tech team that we allude to. They have since become an independent business. They are called navigating.art, and they are building a platform. They're interested in talking to different projects now, but initially they were working exclusively with us, trying to figure out how to meet the demands for doing Gauguin and Wesselmann, like a full Catalogue Raisonné and something like a digital corpus. So it's been 5 years of working together to come to a place where we could create these types of publications.
Okay, and is this tool that you're using, is it more of a content management system that's online, or is it specifically for publishing online catalogues raisonné and the like?
It is
like, is it more for
yeah,
sorry.
You know, we hope that they build a CMS portion to it, but currently it is about publishing Catalogue Raisonnés, being able to do that sort of research. We imagine that it would lend itself easily for something like inventory, but it doesn't have that functionality quite yet.
Right. So what database were you using before this that you had to like migrate, you know, everything into this new custom design for?
Yeah,
I'm
another
just wondering,
proprietary. No, it was another proprietary database that belonged to the Wildensteins. So
I see.
Yeah. So
okay,
no experience with FileMaker Pro, but
yeah, it's tough. I mean, we started off in FileMaker and I actually liked it a lot, especially since it was, you know, it was like a mass-produced sort of program that had a bunch of manuals, so it was easy to get support, I think, for FileMaker. Yeah, and then we moved to Panopticon, which was very much more specific for Catalogues Raisonné. And in that way, it was easier. But I think sometimes harder to get support because not that many people were using it yet. So there are always like pros and cons to these.
Yeah, there always are. I think for us, like what seemed like a major con was that it's an event-based system. All of the data is fielded. So we are, a lot of what we are doing in the background is doing massive data cleaning projects and trying to link everything we have to authoritative vocabularies. So like the Getty Union List of Artist Names, the AAT, you know, things like this. And, you know, that has required a lot of internal diplomacy, because it's, you know, it's a lot of work to move from like primarily text-based information to very fielded information. But the goal is to have a lot of information that's shareable between projects. So
No, it's great. If we could
That's
somehow establish like a more consistent like method of like using like words and keywords, it would make it easier for us to share that info, right?
Yeah, and
Huh?
we've already seen some of the advantages of that just a little bit as like Bearden has started up, and there are times when like data pops up from that project in a Wesselmann exhibition or vice versa, and we don't have to be looking for it. We just run into it. Oh, I see that we're
Right.
both in the same exhibition and we're working on it, and I have this info. So there are moments. The more that we have artists who cross over in era and venue and gallery representation, the more we're actually going to start to see that really pay off, I think. So I think that's just at the beginning of the advantages that we'll end up having for having that kind of structured data.
Yes, and like I think that's a sign of a really great database, right? Having like all of those linked, like having such a relational database, I guess, like lets you find those things that you didn't even know that you were looking for. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like as Huffa said in I think the end of the video, what was it about like the pros and the cons? Like, even the cons come out of something you're working on that was positive.
Yeah, that was my glass half full moment. Yeah.
Well, I love it. And I feel like we should all try to like internalize that, especially during the hard moments of like slogging through research sometimes. But I think that on that note, it's a great place for us to end. So, thank you again for taking the time to produce that video for us, to sit here and chat with us and take all these questions. Everyone in the audience, thank you so much for coming. You gave a great turnout to our inaugural program. I hope that I covered as many of your questions as I could. If not, feel free to contact any one of us to follow up. We're always happy to talk about catalogues raisonné or digital corpuses.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, again, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
Hope to see you at our next program.